They call it the land of the morning calm. That's a damn lie. Korea 1951 was the land of frozen mud and screaming steel. I'm Sergeant Elias Eli Cole, but back then, I was just a private from South Carolina who knew more about planting rice than fighting communists. The cold was a living thing, a predator that crawled into your bones and didn't leave. But the cold wasn't what scared us. What scared us was the sound. A low, rumbling growl that shook the ice off the pine trees before you ever saw them. T-34s, Soviet-made, North Korean-driven, mean, sloped armor bastards that our bazookas just seemed to anger. Our white officers, fresh from West Point, were looking at their maps, planning retreats. They saw a valley. They saw a strategic withdrawal. I saw something different. I saw a frozen-over rice paddy. And I knew from a lifetime of working wetland that what looks solid on top is just a trap underneath. Lieutenant Miller told me to stick to my rifle when I told him. He saw a private. He saw a colored boy who belonged behind a mule, not in a tactical meeting. He didn't see a farmer. And he didn't realize that in this frozen hell a farmer was exactly what they needed, because those T-34s, they were heavy, and I knew the ground beneath them was hungry. If you believe that the smartest weapon in a war isn't always a gun and want to hear more stories about the men they forgot to mention, hit that like button and subscribe. Help me keep these memories alive. My name is Elias Cole. Most folks called me Eli. Back home in the Carolinas, I was a sharecropper. My hands knew the weight of a shovel, the smell of wet earth, and the patience it takes to make something grow from nothing. In 1951, I was wearing the uniform of the 24th Infantry Regiment, a segregated unit. Though they were starting to talk about integration, that just meant we got the worst gear and the worst positions, but now we got to do it near white soldiers. We were bogged down near the Pukun River, in a valley so cold our damn Jeep engines froze solid. The conflict was simple. 6 Soviet-built T-34-85 tanks were using the valley as a personal highway, shelling our positions at will. They were ghosts. They'd hit us and disappear, their thick armor shrugging off our 3.5-inch rockets like they were spitballs. Command was terrified. They saw an armored fist and were ready to fold. But I saw a farming problem. The highway they were using? It wasn't a road. It was a dike, a raised path between flooded rice paddies, frozen solid by the sub-zero winter. The officers saw a solid ground approach. I saw a thin crust of ice over 10 feet of cold, thick, bottomless mud. My crazy trick wasn't about fighting the tanks, it was about farming them. It was about making the ground they trusted turn against them. And all it took was some dynamite, a lot of nerve, and a lifetime of knowing exactly how to make the earth open up and swallow your problems. For 3 days we'd been playing a deadly game of hide-and-seek with those T-34s. The score was 6 of us dead, a burned-out supply truck, and our only 50 cal machine gun nest turned into a smoking crater. The tanks were zero. They were smart, or at least their commander was. They never came at us from the same place twice, but they always used that dike. It was the only high, flat ground in the whole damn valley. It cut right through the frozen paddies, a long, raised causeway of packed earth, wide enough for one tank. It was a perfect sniper's perch for them. They'd rumble into position, lob 2 or 3 high-explosive shells into our perimeter, and then reverse back into the morning fog before our bazooka teams could even get a fix. On the morning of the 4th day, they got bold. The fog was thick, like a wet gray blanket. We heard it before we saw it, that clank-squeal-clank of the treads. "Bazooka team, front and center!" Lieutenant Miller screamed. He was a young white kid, maybe 22, with a fresh-pressed uniform that still had the creases in it and a permanent look of panic in his eyes. He hated the cold. He hated the food, and I got the feeling he really hated being in charge of a company of colored infantry. 2 men from our weapons platoon, Little Joe, and a corporal named Dennis, scrambled from their hole, the 3.5-inch bazooka on Dennis's shoulder. They ran low, slipping on the icy rocks, trying to get to a ditch that had a clear shot at the dike about 80 yards away. The first T-34 nosed out of the fog, a massive dark green beast. It looked prehistoric. It stopped, its long 85mm cannon sniffing the air. "Fire! Fire now, Dennis!" Miller shrieked from the command post. Dennis got to one knee. Little Joe slapped the rocket into the tube. Whoosh! The backblast kicked up a cloud of snow and dirt. The rocket shot out a perfect fiery streak and hit the T-34 square on the sloped frontal plate. Clang! The sound was disappointing. It was like hitting a church bell with a pebble. The rocket just bounced off. It exploded in the air, a useless puff of black smoke. The tank hadn't even flinched. Before Dennis could reload, the tank's turret swiveled. Not fast. It was slow, methodical, insulting. It was telling us it had all the time in the world. The cannon fired. The whump crack of the high-explosive shell was deafening. It didn't hit Dennis and little Joe. It hit the frozen ground 10 feet in front of them. The explosion turned the rock-hard earth into a million tiny, frozen dirt shrapnel. We heard them scream. When the smoke cleared, they were just gone. Not bodies. Just a red stain on the snow and the twisted metal of the bazooka tube. "God damn it!" Miller screamed, slamming his fist against a crate. "God damn these pea shooters!" "Sir," our platoon sergeant, Sergeant Beaumont, said, "we gotta pull back. We can't fight 'em. Not with what we got." Beaumont was a good man. A lifer. He'd fought in Germany. He knew a no-win situation. The tank fired again, this time at our mortar pit. Another perfect hit. It was just target practice for them. Then, as calmly as it had arrived, it put itself in reverse and disappeared back into the fog. The silence that followed was worse than the shelling. It was the silence of a graveyard. We'd just lost 3 more men. "Everyone pull it in," Miller said, his voice shaking. "Sergeants, to the CP. We're drawing up a retreat plan. We'll try to move out after dark." Retreat? I thought, looking out at the valley. Retreat where? We were 10 miles from the next friendly line. We'd freeze to death before we got halfway, and those tanks would just hunt us down in the open. The sergeants all shuffled into the half-destroyed farmhouse Miller used as a command post. I wasn't a sergeant. I was just a private first class. I was on perimeter watch. My job was to stand in a hole and die if the tanks came back. I stood there, my M1 Garand feeling like a useless stick in my hands. I stared at the dike. I stared at the spot where Dennis and little Joe had been, and I was angry. But I wasn't just angry at the tank. I was angry at the ground. Back home, when a tractor got stuck in the spring mud, you didn't just pull it. You had to know the ground. You had to know where the water sat, where the clay was thick, where the sand was soft. You had to read the land, and I was reading this land. Miller and the officers, they saw a road. I saw a man-made levee. That dike was built to hold water in the paddies. It was packed clay and earth, maybe 10 feet high. But what holds water in also holds water under. After a whole summer of monsoon rains, that entire valley floor would be saturated. The ground under that dike would be soup. The only thing keeping those tanks from sinking to their bellies was 2 feet of hard winter frost. The frost was the only thing. I looked at the tank treads in the snow. They were deep. They were pressing hard. That frost was already cracking under the weight. An idea started to form. It was a crazy idea. It wasn't a soldier's idea. It was a farmer's idea. Back home, when we needed to clear a new field, we didn't just dig out the stumps. We'd get dynamite, we called it stump jumper, and we'd blow 'em out. But you had to know how. You didn't just light a fuse. You'd drill a hole under the stump, right in the wet root ball, pack it tight, and tamp it. The water in the ground would make the explosion 10 times more powerful. It wouldn't just blow the stump up. It would lift the whole damn thing, roots and all, right out of the earth. What if we did that to the dike? Not a big explosion. Not one that the North Koreans would see. But small, wet charges, drilled under the frost line. What if we just loosened the soil? What if we used our demolition charges to break that 2-foot frost cap from below? We could turn that solid-looking road into a 50-yard-long trap of freezing, bottomless mud. The tanks wouldn't even know it was there until they were halfway across. They'd drive right onto it, the crust would break, and they'd just sink. I left my post. I didn't care. I walked right into the CP. Miller, Beaumont, and 2 other sergeants were huddled over a map. "What in the hell do you want, Private?" Miller snapped, not even looking up. "Sir," I said, my voice shaking a little, "don't retreat. I know how to stop them." That got his attention. He looked up, his face a mix of disbelief and annoyance. "You? You know how to stop 6 T-34s? And our bazookas don't?" "Yes, sir, it's the ground. The dike they're using. It's a trap." I laid it out. The rice paddies, the saturated earth, the frost cap, the dynamite. Using the charges not to blow the tanks, but to blow the road under them. When I was finished, the sergeants were just staring at me. Miller was laughing. A short, barking laugh. "Mud?" You're going to stop them with mud? Private, that is the single most idiotic, a country bumpkin piece of stupidity I have ever heard. You think you're going to go out there with a shovel and dig a hole and they're just going to fall in? Get the hell out of my CP. Sir, it'll work. I pleaded, my face burning. I know this kind of land. It's a levee. It's not stable. I said get out. You're a rifleman, Cole. You shoot what I tell you to shoot. You're not a damn engineer and you're sure as hell not a general. One more word out of you and I'll have you on report for insubordination. Now get back to your post. I looked at Sergeant Beaumont. He wasn't laughing. He was looking at the map, then at me. He was thinking. But he was a lifer. He wasn't going to cross the lieutenant. He just shook his head, a tiny, almost invisible gesture that said, "Let it go, son." I shut my mouth. I saluted. I turned around and walked out into the cold, my ears burning with shame. Country bumpkin stupidity. I got back to my hole, my mind racing. He was wrong. The officers were wrong. They were all going to get us killed, all because they thought they were smarter than a farmer. I sat there for an hour, watching the fog just stewing. Then I felt a hand on my shoulder. It was Sergeant Beaumont. He'd come out to the line. "Cole," he said, his voice a low rumble. "You sure? You ain't just blowing smoke?" "I'm sure, Sarge. I'd bet my life on it." He chewed on his lip, staring out at the dike. "The engineers have a stash of C3 charges. Left 'em when they pulled back last week. In the old schoolhouse cellar." My heart started hammering. "Yes, sir?" "Miller's a fool," he said, so quiet I could barely hear him. "He's gonna get us all killed. But if I cross him, it's my stripes." "I know, Sarge." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small brass key. "This is for the lock on that cellar. I'm gonna be preoccupied with the radio trying to raise command for the next hour. I'd better not see you or anyone else near that schoolhouse. You understand me, Private?" He dropped the key into my hand. It was cold and heavy. "I didn't see you at all, Sergeant," I said. "Good," he grunted. He turned to leave, then paused. "And Cole, don't blow yourself up. That'd be a hell of a lot of paperwork." That brass key felt like it weighed a ton in my glove. It was one thing to have a crazy idea. It was another thing entirely to disobey a direct order from an officer. But when I looked over at the dark stain in the snow where Dennis and little Joe used to be, the choice got simple. Getting busted by Miller was better than getting buried by those tanks. "Curtis, preach," I hissed to the two men in the foxhole next to mine. Curtis was a big old boy from Georgia, had hands like smoked hams and wasn't afraid of anything. Preach was a skinny fella from Alabama who'd read a psalm every time the artillery started. They were my boys. They were also dirt men, like me. "What is it, Eli?" Curtis mumbled, not moving his head. "Get your entrenching tools and your ammo satchels. Empty the satchels. We're going for a walk." "A walk?" Preach frowned. "Hell's done froze over, Eli. Ain't no time for a stroll." "You trust me?" I asked. They looked at each other, then at me. Curtis let out a long sigh, the vapor blowing from his mouth like a steam engine. "I trust that you're crazy. Where we going?" "Schoolhouse cellar. Sergeant Beaumont. He gave us an hour." Their eyes went wide. They knew what was in the cellar. "Lord have mercy," Preach whispered, but he was already grabbing his shovel. "Miller's gonna have our hides. Miller's gonna get us all killed if we sit here," I said. "Let's move." Keeping low, we moved like shadows through the shattered tree line to the ruined schoolhouse. It was a burned-out shell, but the stone cellar was intact. Beaumont's key turned in the lock with a loud click. The place was cold and smelled like mold and rotten potatoes. And there it was in the corner, stacked like firewood. 3 wooden crates stenciled Composition C3. "This is it," I said, my heart pounding. I grabbed a crowbar and pried one open. Inside, the blocks of C3 looked like greasy, gray modeling clay. Smelled strange, almost sweet, like almonds. "How much?" Curtis asked, his eyes gleaming. "Not much," I said, my mind going back to blowing stumps. "We need heave, not a big bang. We need it wet. Small charges packed deep. We need 6 traps. 2 bricks per trap. Gimme 12 bricks. And we need the caps and the fuse. The time fuse. Can't use electrical. They'll see the wires." We filled our empty canvas satchels with the C3 bricks, stuffing M2 blasting caps and coils of fuse into our pockets. The weight was comforting. It was the weight of a chance. Getting out of the cellar was one thing. Getting to the dike was another. The fog was still clinging to the ground, which was a blessing. But the dike was 80 yards of open ground. Can't all go at once, I said. Preach, you stay on overwatch. Give us one shot if you see anything. Curtis, you're with me. We crawl, and we don't make a sound. Crawl 80 yards in the snow? Curtis groaned. Gonna freeze my nuts off. Better than getting them blown off, I said. And then we were moving. Belly down, pushing the satchels in front of us, sliding on the ice and snow. It took forever. Every snap of a frozen twig sounded like a rifle shot. The cold soaked through my jacket, but sweat was pouring down my back. I was terrified. If a tank patrol caught us out here, we were dead. We finally reached the base of the dike. The silence was absolute. I could hear my own breathing, ragged and loud. Okay, I whispered. Right here. I pointed to a spot where the tank treads were deepest, where the ice was already spiderwebbed. We can't dig, Eli, shovel's too loud. Curtis whispered back. We ain't gonna dig. I pulled my bayonet. We're gonna drill. We set to work. It was a nightmare. The top layer was frozen like concrete. We took turns, putting all our weight on the bayonet hilt, twisting, scraping. For 10 minutes we'd made almost no progress. It ain't gonna work, man, Curtis said, his teeth chattering. Hush. Feel the ground, I said. Don't fight it. I closed my eyes, feeling the vibration through the steel. I made myself think like a farmer. Where does the water pool? Here, the edge, where the snowmelt refroze. It's thinner here. I was right. The shoulder of the dike was softer. We started drilling there, a narrow hole straight down. First 6 inches of ice, then a foot of frozen earth, and then squelch. The bayonet suddenly sank. I pulled it out, and it came up covered in dark, stinking mud. Bingo. Now, I said. I took 2 bricks of C3 and kneaded them together, forcing a blasting cap into the center. I cut a length of time fuse, 30 seconds. Not too long, not too short. I carefully fed the charge into the hole, using my shovel handle to pack it as deep as it would go, until it was below the frost line, sitting right in that wet mud. Tamp it, I whispered. Curtis began pushing the snow and frozen dirt back into the hole, packing it down hard. This was the most important part, the tamp. Just like with the stumps, the blast had to be contained by the mud and ice to get the heaving effect I wanted. We set the charge, leaving just the tip of the green fuse showing, which we hid under a handful of snow. 1 down, I said, heart pounding. 5 to go. It took us the rest of the hour. 6 times we crawled, drilled, planted, and tamped, spacing them about 50 feet apart along the most vulnerable stretch of the dike. By the time we finished, the sun was getting stronger, threatening to burn off the fog, and we were frozen. Our hands were numb and raw, and we were late. We crawled back as fast as we could. Preach covered us as we tumbled back into our holes, looking like a pair of mudmen. I'd barely caught my breath when I heard Miller's boots. He stood in front of my hole, his face red with cold and rage. Where in the hell have you been, Cole? Your post has been empty. I just stared up at him, trying not to shiver. And what the hell happened to you? You been rolling in the filth? He looked at my muddy hands, at the C3 grease smeared on my jacket. His eyes narrowed. He glanced at the schoolhouse. The padlock was back on, but I hadn't had time to cover our tracks in the snow. Comprehension hit his face. You, he started, his voice low and furious. You disobeyed a direct order. You stole ordnance. Sergeant Beaumont. Beaumont came out of the CP, his face a mask of professional innocence. Yes, Lieutenant? Arrest this man. He's under. And then, we heard it. Clank, squeal, clank. It was coming from the end of the valley. The sound was louder this time, faster. Miller's face went white. The hate in his eyes was replaced by pure terror. Contact, he stammered. Positions, everyone to positions. The roar grew. A tank nosed out of the fog. Then another, and another. It wasn't a patrol, it was 3 of them, coming in a line, fast, confident. They were coming right for the dike, right for our traps. Miller forgot all about me. He dove into the CP. Eli, Curtis whispered from his hole, his eyes wide. They're coming, but how we gonna light the fuses? I looked at the tanks. The first one was 200 yards from the first fuse. The second was right behind it. They were coming too fast. We'd never get out there in time. We ain't, I said, my stomach sinking. We can't. But then, what was the point? I watched the first tank. It was moving at a good 20 miles an hour. It was going to roll right over all 6 charges before we even knew what happened. All that work, for nothing. And then, it stopped. The lead tank stopped, just short of the first charge. It just sat there, its engine idling. "Why'd it stop?" Curtis asked. And then the tank fired. Not at us. It fired a smoke shell into the woods on our left. The second tank did the same on our right. They were laying a smokescreen. They weren't just attacking, they were covering. A fourth tank rolled out of the fog, and a fifth, and a sixth. The whole company, all 6 T-34s. They were all there, just sitting in a line on the road just before the dike. "Lord have mercy," Preach whispered. "It's a full-on assault." They were waiting for the smoke to spread before they advanced. They were all lined up, a row of steel ducks, and the lead tank was sitting less than 50 yards from my first charge. "Preach," I said, my voice barely working. "What's the effective range on a Garand?" 800 yards if you're good," he said. "I don't need 800. I need 50, and I ain't aiming for a man, you see it?" I pointed. The tiny curl of green fuse nestled in the snow. It was barely visible. "See what? Is that—" "Eli, no. I just need a spark," I said. "C3 won't blow from a bullet, but a blasting cap will. You'll never hit that cap, Eli, it's too small." "I ain't aiming for the cap," I said, a new, crazier idea forming. "I'm aiming for the fuse. A rifle bullet won't set off C3, but maybe, just maybe, the hot lead and the spark from the hit will be enough to light that time fuse." It was the stupidest, most desperate long shot of my life. "Cover me," I whispered. I raised my M1 Garand. I lined up the front sight post. Not on the cap. On the coiled green fuse right next to the C3 brick. I breathed in, let half of it out, just like my daddy taught me to shoot deer. My finger tightened on the trigger. Entendido. Proseguindo. Paso 4. Chapter 3. 6. Chapter 3. The world shrunk to the front sight of my rifle. 50 yards. The curl of green fuse was a tiny speck against the dirty snow. The T-34's engine was a low, throaty rumble, a perfect backdrop. I wasn't just a farmer. I wasn't just a soldier. I was a Carolina squirrel hunter, and that fuse was a gray tail flicking in the brush. "Squeeze, don't pull." Ping. The Garand jumped in my shoulder. The sound was sharp, tiny against the backdrop of the tank engines. For a second, nothing. I'd missed. My heart sank. Miller was going to have me shot, and we were all going to die. "You missed, Eli," Curtis hissed. "No," I breathed. "Look." A tiny wisp of white smoke, thin as a thread, was rising from the snow. It wasn't gun smoke. It was chemical smoke. The hot .30 caliber round had grazed the fuse, and the friction and heat had been just enough. It was lit. 30 seconds, I whispered, chambering another round. "Get down." I didn't wait. I aimed at the second charge, 50 feet beyond the first. Ping! Another miss. Ping! Hit! I saw the telltale wisp. 2. I scrambled, aiming at the third. Ping! 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 It took me 3 rounds, but I got it. 3. "What are you doing, Cole?" Miller was screaming from the CP. "You're giving away our position, you lunatic." The lead tank commander must have heard the pings of the bullets hitting the frozen earth. Or maybe he just got the all clear on the radio. His engine roared and the tank lurched forward. "Here he comes," Preach yelled. "He's too late," I said, a grin splitting my face. The T-34 hit the first spot, the one I'd lit first. It was moving at a good clip, maybe 15 miles an hour. It rolled right over the charge. And then the charge went. It wasn't a huge boom. It was a deep, wet whump. A geyser of black mud, ice, and snow erupted from under the tank. The explosion didn't penetrate the armor. It lifted it. The front of the 32-ton tank heaved up into the air, its tracks spinning uselessly. The tank commander, thinking he'd hit a mine, slammed on the brakes. That was his big mistake. The tank stopped, its full weight now pressing down on the second charge I'd lit. Whump. The second charge went off right under its belly. This time the frozen crust of the dike, already fractured, just disintegrated. The tank dropped. It fell, nose first, into a pit of freezing, bottomless slurry. The front end of the T-34 vanished and the rear end tilted up, its cannon pointing uselessly at the sky. It was stuck, hopelessly stuck. The second tank in line, seeing his buddy suddenly nosedive, panicked. He slammed on his brakes too, but he was right on top of the third charge. Whump! His too went off. The dike collapsed beneath him. He didn't sink as deep, but his left track, the drive sprocket, and the whole suspension assembly were swallowed by the mud. The track snapped with a sound like a giant's pistol shot. He was crippled, spinning in a circle, a sitting duck. The 4 other tanks just stopped. They were terrified. Their invincible road had just eaten 2 of their friends. They didn't know what was happening. They thought it was a new kind of mine, a whole field of them. Bazookas! Sergeant Beaumont roared, his voice filled with a wild, giddy joy. He'd seen it. He'd understood. Light 'em up! They ain't going nowhere! Our 2 remaining bazooka teams who had been hiding useless finally had a target. They had 2 stationary targets. Whoosh! The first rocket hit the lead tank, the one that was nose down. It hit the exposed rear engine deck. A puff of smoke and then a bright orange tongue of flame licked out of the engine ports. Whoosh! The second rocket hit the crippled tank right in the turret ring. The turret jammed and the hatch flew open. 3 North Korean tankers, their uniforms smoking, piled out and tried to run. Preach and Curtis opened up. Their Garens barked and the tankers fell, disappearing into the gray snow. Cease fire! Cease fire! Beaumont yelled. The valley went quiet, except for the crackle of the burning tank and the whine of the crippled one's turret still trying to turn. The other 4 tanks, they were in full-blown panic. The lead one, the commander, started reversing. He backed up so fast he nearly slid off the dike. The others followed, clanking and squealing, scrambling over each other to get back into the fog. They were running. 4 T-34s were in a full-blown rout, running from a handful of black infantrymen with 2 bazookas and a farmer's trick. The entire company was on its feet, screaming, cheering, hollering. We'd done it. We'd held the line. I just sat in my hole, my rifle hot in my hands, my heart hammering so hard I thought it would break my ribs. I was shaking, not from cold, but from the sheer, wild, it-actually-worked feeling. I looked over at Miller's CP. He was standing outside, his mouth open, just staring at the 2 burning, sinking monuments in the mud. He looked at the wrecks, then he looked at me. His face wasn't angry. It was just blank. It was the face of a man whose entire world, all his West Point books and his maps, had just been proven wrong by a country bumpkin. Sergeant Beaumont walked over, his face split by the biggest grin I'd ever seen. He clapped me on the shoulder so hard it nearly knocked me over. Cole, he said, his voice booming. That was the most beautiful, god-awful, insane piece of farming I have ever witnessed. You got those other 3 traps still set? I nodded, my voice gone. Yes, sir. We didn't light 'em. Beaumont's grin got wider. Well, the day's still young, ain't it? Let's just sit tight. Maybe they'll be stupid enough to come back for their friends. He turned and walked away, whistling. And I knew right then that Miller wasn't in charge anymore. Beaumont was, and he was listening to the farmer. Entendido. Proseguindo. Paso 5. Chapter 4. 7. Chapter 4. The rest of that day was the strangest I'd ever spent. We were quiet, but it wasn't the scared quiet from before. It was a coiled, confident quiet. The men, my brothers in the 24th, looked at me different. When I walked past, they'd nod. Curtis and Preach were heroes, retelling the story of the crawl and the C3 bricks to every man who'd listen. I wasn't Eli the sharecropper anymore. I was Eli the tank killer. I just kept my head down, cleaned my rifle, and watched the dike. Lieutenant Miller stayed in his hole. He didn't come out. He sent a runner to Beaumont for the after-action report. I saw the runner talk to Beaumont, and Beaumont just pointed at me. Ask Private Cole. He's the one running the defense. That was a hell of a thing to hear a sergeant say. The runner, a white kid from Miller's staff, looked at me confused, then just scurried back to the CP. No report got filed. The 2 tanks sat out there in the mud, one burning itself out with a nasty black smoke, the other one dead and silent. The North Koreans didn't come back. Not that day. They were spooked. Beaumont, Curtis, Preach, and I held a tactical meeting of our own as the sun started to go down. They ain't gonna leave 'em, Beaumont said, chewing on a frozen ration. Those T-34s are worth more than gold to 'em. They'll be back, they'll just be smarter about it. So what's the plan, Eli? Curtis asked, looking at me. More mud pies? No, I said, thinking hard. They ain't gonna fall for the same trick twice. They saw the mines. They're gonna bring engineers. They're gonna come slow, they'll sweep the road. So the other 3 charges are useless. Beaumont grunted. Not useless, Sarge. Just repurposed, I said. They're gonna come on foot first to clear the way, and they'll come at night. They'll expect us to be watching the dike. So we booby-trap the dike, Curtis said. Nope. That's what they expect. They'll be looking for wires, looking for disturbances. They'll be slow and careful, I said, my farmer's brain clicking. When you're hunting a smart buck, you don't wait where he is. You wait where he's going, and they ain't gonna come up the dike on foot. They're gonna come alongside it, in the paddies, using the dike itself for cover. Beaumont and the others looked out at the frozen rice paddies. They were wide open, flat, and frozen solid. That's a kill zone, son, Beaumont said. They ain't stupid enough to walk into that. It's a kill zone if you're standing up, Sarge, but not if you're low crawling. And that's what they'll do. They'll send a dozen men, dressed in white snowsuits, crawling right across that ice to get to our flank. They'll do it tonight while it's dark so they can clear the dike for the other tanks to come through tomorrow. So what do? Preach asked, his eyes dark. We can't see him in the dark. We don't need to see him, I said. I pointed to the remaining 3 charges still buried in the dike. Those charges ain't for the tanks anymore, they're for the ice. Beaumont's eyes lit up. Lord Eli, you are a devious son of a... If we light those fuses, I explained, the blast won't just break the dike. It'll shatter that whole frozen paddy for 50 yards in every direction. The ice is only a foot thick. Anybody out there, they're gonna go straight into that freezing water. It's a death sentence, Preach whispered, a look of awe on his face. Drowning or freezing to death in seconds. But how do we light 'em? Curtis asked. We can't be shooting fuses in the dark. And we can't run wires, they'll see 'em. We don't, I said. We use a tripwire, a pull detonator. We'll string it low, right across the paddy. When they crawl over it, boom. No, Beaumont said, his voice firm. Tripwires are finicky. They freeze, they break, and a pull detonator. You only get one. No. If we're gonna do this, we do it right. He looked at me, a hard glint in his eye. You got us into this, farmer. You're gonna see us through it. What's the plan, Sarge? I asked. The plan, he said, is you and me. We're going back out. We're gonna rig those last 3 charges with electrical caps, and we're gonna run the wires right back here, to my hole. We're gonna sit up all night, and when you, farmer, when you tell me they're in the water, I'm gonna hit the box. We're gonna let 'em get nice and cold before we cook 'em. My blood ran cold. Go back out there, with 2 dead tanks and 4 more angry ones just down the valley. Sarge, the wires, they'll see 'em, I said. Not if we lay 'em right, Beaumont said. And we're gonna lay 'em. Grab your kit, Cole. We're going hunting. He wasn't asking. As night fell, a hard, brittle cold settled over the valley. It was a clear night, the stars sharp and bright, the moon throwing a pale, ghostly light on the snow. It was beautiful, and it was terrifying. It meant they could see us. Me and Beaumont, dressed in our bulkiest white snow capes, slipped out of the line. We carried a reel of commo wire, 3 electrical blasting caps, and our knives. This was different. This wasn't a desperate crawl. This was a slow, methodical, professional job. Beaumont moved like a cat. He taught me how to use the shadows of the dead tanks, how to move only when the wind rustled the pines, how to lay the wire in the old tank tracks, where it wouldn't be seen. We got to the first charge. My hands were so numb I could barely feel the C3. I dug out the old time fuse with my knife and my teeth chattering carefully inserted the electrical cap. Beaumont stood watch, his Thompson submachine gun at the ready. Hurry it up, farmer, he hissed. I'm trying, Sarge. This ain't like wiring a lamp. I connected the cap, retamped the charge, and we unspooled the wire, crawling backward, burying it in the snow every few feet. We did it twice more. It took 2 hours. 2 hours of lying in the snow, expecting a bullet in the back every second. By the time we got back to our lines, I couldn't feel my feet. We crawled into Beaumont's hole, which was deeper and reinforced with ammo cans. He had a field telephone box, the kind you crank. He stripped the commo wires and attached them to the 2 terminals. There, he said, his breath pluming. 3 traps, 1 plunger. He handed me his binoculars. You're up, farmer. You know the ground. You watch that, Patty. My hands are on the box. You say when. And so we sat. Hour after hour. The moon crept across the sky. The temperature dropped to 20 below. My eyes burned from staring through the binoculars. Just after 2 a.m., I saw it. Sarge, I whispered. What? Movement. Left flank, by the creek, I pointed. At first it was nothing. Just a shadow. Then, another shadow. They ain't in the paddy, Eli, Beaumont whispered, squinting. They're in the trees. No, they're just getting to the paddy. Watch. A single figure, dressed in a white snow cape just like ours, slipped out of the trees and went flat onto the ice. Then another, and another. A dozen of them. They were good. They were real good. They looked like ghosts, just patches of white sliding over white. They're coming, I breathed, my heart in my throat. They're moving toward the dike, just like I said. How many? I count 12, maybe 15. They're spread out. They're gonna clear the dike for the tanks. We watched. It was agonizing. They moved so slowly. A crawl, stop. A crawl, stop. They were halfway across the paddy. They were nearing the kill zone. Now, Eli, Beaumont whispered, his hand tightening on the plunger. Not yet. Not yet. Let him get in the deep water. The lead man was 20 yards from the dike. He was right in the center of our trap. The others were all fanned out behind him. Now, Eli? Wait. I watched the last man clear the shallow edge. Wait. The lead man stopped. He raised his head, as if sniffing the air. He was looking right at our position. He'd sensed something. Now, Sarge, I screamed. Beaumont put his whole body into it. He slammed his fist down on the plunger. Cray-thum. The world exploded. The 3 charges went off at once, not with a whump, but with a single deafening crack that echoed down the valley. The entire dike heaved, and the 50-yard stretch of frozen rice paddy just disintegrated. It shattered like a pane of glass, and the screams started. We heard the splash as a dozen men in heavy winter gear were dumped into 10 feet of black, freezing cold water and mud. The ice was gone, replaced by a churning, open wound in the earth. The screams were awful. They weren't battle cries. They were the sounds of men dying in the dark, dying in the cold, clawing at the broken edges of the ice, their wet wool uniforms pulling them down. Preach! Beaumont roared. Get a flare up, light 'em up! A flare shot up, pop hiss, and bathed the scene in a cold white light. It was a nightmare. Men were thrashing in the water, their hands bleeding as they tried to get a grip on the sharp, broken ice. They were already slowing down, the cold killing them in seconds. The North Korean machine gunners on the far ridge, seeing what was happening, opened up, firing wildly, trying to give their men covering fire. They're shooting at their own men, Curtis yelled. They ain't shooting at 'em, Beaumont said, his face grim in the flare light. They're putting 'em down, they're giving 'em a merciful death. And he was right. The machine gun fire stitched across the water, and the last few thrashing men went still. The flare died. The valley was dark again, and silent. That was day 1. We were 2 for 2. Entendido. Proseguindo. Paso 6. Chapter 5. 8. Chapter 5. Day 2 dawned quiet. Deathly quiet. The fog was gone, burned off by a weak, watery sun that gave no warmth. The valley was still. The only new features were the 2 burned-out T-34s and the big, black, jagged hole in the rice paddy, which was already starting to skim over with fresh ice. The bodies of the North Korean sappers were gone, sunk to the bottom. We were all on edge. We'd won. We'd won twice. But we knew they weren't done. They couldn't be. No commander would sacrifice 6 tanks and a platoon of engineers without a fight. They had to come back. They had to. They ain't gonna come up the dike, Curtis said, his voice hoarse. And they sure as hell ain't gonna swim. No, I said, scanning the far tree line with my binoculars. They're gonna be angry. They're done being smart. They're just gonna come. What's that mean, Eli? Preach asked, cleaning his rifle for the 10th time. Come flying? It means they're gonna come straight on, I said. No more dike. They're gonna bring the other 4, spread out, line abreast. They're gonna come right across the open field. Right at us. They're just gonna charge, figuring we can't possibly have enough bazookas to stop all 4 of them at once. Sergeant Beaumont, who was now permanently in the foxhole next to mine, lowered his own binoculars. A frontal assault, across the main paddy. But it's frozen solid, Eli. We proved that. They'll roll right over it. Yes, sir, that's what they're counting on, I said. So what's the play, Farmer? Beaumont asked. We ain't got no more C3. No, sir, I said, a cold, sick feeling in my stomach. We don't. We're out of tricks. A silence fell over the whole. We were out of tricks. The crazy farmer was all out of ideas. We'd just have to fight, and we'd die. I looked at the ground in front of us. The main paddy, a huge, flat, frozen expanse, maybe 400 yards across. It was a perfect field of fire. But what good was that against 4 T-34s? I thought about home. I thought about the winter of '47. We'd had a hard freeze, froze the pond solid. My mule, old Samson, had gotten loose and tried to walk across it to get to the winter hay. The ice held for about 10 steps. Then it cracked and he went in. We spent all day trying to get him out. He was a 200-pound animal and we couldn't budge him. He just froze, right there in the water. The ice held for 10 steps. "Sarge," I said, my voice barely a whisper, "what's the one thing we got more of than anything else?" Beaumont looked around. "Misery? Cold? Scared white lieutenants? Water, Sarge. And ice. Look at that paddy. It's a sheet of it. And it's holding up, but it's only a foot thick. It held those sappers last night, but a T-34, that's 32 tons. It's got to be cracking under its own weight. It's just holding on. Get to the point, Cole. My nerves are shot." "Our mortars," I said, my heart starting to pound again. "We got 2 of them left, and we got a whole case of high-explosive rounds. What happens if you drop a dozen HE mortar rounds on a sheet of ice?" Beaumont's eyes went wide. It shatters." "Yes, sir, it don't just make holes. The shockwave, the concussion. It'll spiderweb the whole damn thing. It'll turn that solid field into a million broken pieces, just like you're breaking ice on a water trough. They'll still float." "No, wait," Curtis said, catching on. "They're 32 tons. They won't float for a second." "We've only got one shot at it, though," I said. "We can't just fire at them. We gotta lead them. We gotta wait till they're all on the ice halfway across. Till they're committed. Then we drop everything we got right in front of them. We break the ice they ain't got to yet. They'll be moving too fast to stop. They'll just drive right into their own graves." Beaumont looked at me for a long time. "Cole," he said, "if I ever get back to the States, I am never ever playing poker with you." He turned and bellowed, "Mortars, to me, you're with the farmer." We spent the next hour registering the mortars. We didn't fire. We just did the math. We set the tubes, calculated the range for the center of the paddy. We had about 20 HE rounds. We'd fire them all at once. And then we waited. The afternoon sun was just starting to dip when we heard it. Not the clank. The roar. "Here they come!" the lookout screamed. And there they were. The 4 remaining T-34s. They came out of the tree line, not in a column, but in a perfect skirmish line, spread out 100 yards apart. Just like I'd predicted. They weren't aiming for the dike. They were aiming for us. Their cannons were already firing, shelling our positions. Thump, crack, the shells screaming over our heads. "Hold your fire!" Beaumont roared. "Nobody shoots, not the bazookas, not the rifles, let 'em come." It was the hardest thing I've ever done. Sitting in a hole, being shelled, and not shooting back. The 4 tanks hit the edge of the frozen paddy. They didn't slow down. They were coming on, full tilt, churning up snow, a wave of unstoppable steel. They were 300 yards out. "Now, Eli!" Preach yelled, praying over his rifle. "Not yet," I said, my hands so tight they were numb. "Let 'em get to the middle." They were 200 yards out. The ground was shaking. The noise was a physical thing hitting me in the chest. I could see the commanders' heads in the open hatches. They were arrogant. They thought we were broken. They thought we were running. "Now, Sarge?" the mortarman asked, his hand on a round. "Wait!" I yelled. "Wait for it!" They were 100 yards out. The kill zone. "Now!" I screamed. "Fire! Fire everything! Fire!" Beaumont echoed. The 2 mortars thumped in unison. Thump, 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 thump. The gunners, bless their souls, were dropping rounds as fast as they could. We saw the shells arch up, black specks against the gray sky. And then they came down. They didn't hit the tanks. They hit the ice, 50 yards in front of the tanks. The first explosions were deafening, crack, crack, boom. The ice heaved. Giant white spiderwebs shot out from every impact. The shockwaves hit each other and amplified. The entire 400-yard field of ice just shattered. The 4 T-34 commanders, their hatches open, saw it. We saw the raw panic on their faces. They all slammed on their brakes at the same time. It was the worst thing they could have done. Their full 32-ton weight, stopping instantly, on a sheet of fractured, crumbling ice. The first tank, the one on the far left, went down nose first. The ice just gave way, and it vanished into the black water with a sound like a sinking battleship. It was gone in 2 seconds. The second one tilted, its track spinning, and then the ice under it just dissolved. It sank, slower, the commander screaming as he tried to scramble out, only to be pulled down by the suction. The third and fourth, oh God, they were stuck. The ice had broken, but the mud was shallower. They were wallowing, their tracks spinning, throwing up huge rooster tails of black water and mud. They were trapped. They were helpless. "Bazookas!" Beaumont roared, his voice cracking with pure savage joy. "Get 'em! Whoosh, whoosh!" This time it wasn't a fight. It was an execution. The rockets hit the trapped, immobile tanks. We hit them in the sides, in the rear, in the turrets. One after another, they brewed up. The fuel catching, the ammunition cooking off. Bright orange flames and thick, oily smoke poured into the winter sky. It was over. In 48 hours, 6 Soviet tanks, the terror of the valley, were gone, destroyed. Not by an airstrike, not by artillery, but by one black farmer from Carolina who knew how to read the ground. When the relief column found us a week later, the real U.S. Army, with our own Sherman tanks and hot coffee, they couldn't believe what they were seeing. The valley was a graveyard. 6 T-34s, sunk in the mud or burned out on the ice. The officers from the Armored Corps spent a whole day just studying my traps, taking notes, scratching their heads. Lieutenant Miller, he put me in for a Bronze Star. He said it was for unconventional battlefield ingenuity. When he pinned it on me, he couldn't even look me in the eye. He just mumbled, "Good work, Cole," and walked away. I don't think he ever forgave me for being right. I got home a year later, back to Carolina. I went back to farming, but I never looked at the land the same way. The Army had tried to teach me to be a soldier. They taught me to shoot, to march, to salute. But in the end, none of that mattered. What saved us wasn't the soldier. It was the farmer. War, it turns out, ain't so different from farming. It's just a matter of knowing your ground. You gotta know what's solid, and what's just a thin crust of ice, ready to break. And it doesn't matter if it's a T-34 or a stubborn mule. If you can get the ground to fight for you, you've already won. They can have their maps and their strategies. I'll keep my shovel.